There is a moment in the day when nothing is urgent. The room is quiet, the light feels soft, and time seems to pause just long enough to be noticed. An adult stands there, not doing much, just existing between tasks. Outside, life continues at its usual speed, but inside, everything feels slower, heavier, calmer. It is not sadness, not peace either, just a stillness that asks to be felt. In this pause, memory begins to move without effort, not as pictures, but as feelings. There was a time when days stretched wide, when mornings arrived without wait, and evenings felt far away. Time back then did not press against the chest. It waited. It felt patient, almost endless, like something that could never run out. Now the same hours feel different. They pass quietly, but they do not linger. A day ends before it fully settles. Weeks slip by without asking permission. Nothing dramatic has changed on the surface. Life looks normal, functional, acceptable. Yet somewhere underneath, there is an awareness that something has thinned. It is hard to name what is missing. It is not energy exactly, not hope, just a softness that used to exist without effort. The absence is gentle, almost polite. It does not demand attention. It simply sits there, noticeable only when everything else becomes quiet. In that quiet, the person does not search for answers. They breathe, listen, and let the moment stay unfinished. Time does not explain itself. It just moves, thinner than before, leaving a feeling that something once endless has learned how to disappear without saying anything at all. Nothing demands closure, and nothing rushes them forward in this moment. That quiet pause gently opens a door backward, not to one clear memory, but to a stretch of days that once blended together. Mornings arrived, evenings ended, and everything in between felt ordinary enough to ignore. Youth lived there, unnoticed, moving through routines without being asked to explain itself. Those days were full, but not present. Time was spent, not felt. There were screens glowing late into the night, familiar roads walked without looking around, conversations half heard while the mind wandered elsewhere. Tomorrow was always waiting, generous and patient, promising another chance to pay attention later. Nothing seemed urgent then. Life felt wide, forgiving. If something was delayed, it could be done next week. If a dream felt uncomfortable, it could be revisited someday. The body moved easily. The mind assumed it would always recover. Even boredom felt harmless, something to escape rather than understand. Looking back now, there is no single mistake hiding there, just a softness, a drifting. Days passed the way clouds pass, slowly and without resistance. No one was watching the clock closely, because there seemed to be no reason to. Time felt like a background detail, not a limited resource. The strange thing is how normal it all felt. Nothing was wasted on purpose, nothing was neglected with cruelty. Life was simply being lived on autopilot, quietly trusting that awareness could always be switched on later. Only now does that stretch of unnoticed days feel heavier, not painful, just tender, like realizing you were holding something precious without knowing it had weight. The ache that rises is gentle, not sharp. It does not accuse, it simply notices how much can pass by when presence is postponed, and how easily entire seasons can move through a life without ever being fully seen at all. From those unnoticed days, life did not change through one loud decision. It shifted through small choices that felt too light to carry consequences. Moments of hesitation appeared, brief and quiet, and were often ignored because they seemed harmless. There were intentions formed in silence, plans made loosely without urgency, a promise to start tomorrow, to speak later, to try when the timing felt better. Comfort was chosen, not out of laziness, but out of familiarity. Staying where things were known felt safer than stepping into something uncertain. Nothing dramatic happened when these choices were made. No doors slammed, no warning sounded. Life continued smoothly, which made postponement feel justified. Each delay blended into the next, creating a rhythm that felt calm on the surface. Yet slowly, something subtle shifted. Days began to repeat themselves. Energy thinned without being noticed. The gap between wanting and doing grew wider, but it grew quietly, without confrontation. Intention stayed alive in thought, while action kept waiting for a future moment that never arrived. Looking back now, it is clear how gently life changes direction, not through failure, but through waiting, not through loss, but through comfort chosen again and again. Those small decisions did not feel like decisions at all. They felt temporary. Only later does their weight become visible, not as regret that shouts, but as a realization that life often moves forward while the heart waits, and in that waiting, entire chapters can pass without ever being fully seen at all. The silence returns again, but this time it does not feel the same. It arrives in a familiar room, at a familiar hour, carrying the same stillness as before. Yet something inside responds differently. What once felt calm now feels slightly heavier, as if the quiet has learned a new language. Nothing obvious has changed. Life still looks steady from the outside. The routines remain, the responsibilities continue, and the days move forward without interruption. But within the silence there is a faint tension. Not fear, not panic, just a subtle sense of unease that was not there before. The mind notices it before it understands it. Thoughts linger longer, memories surface without invitation. The quiet no longer feels empty. It feels full of questions that do not demand answers, only recognition. The same silence that once offered rest now asks for attention. There is no dramatic realization in this moment, no clear line between before and after. Awareness arrives softly, almost apologetically, a feeling that something important has shifted, even if its shape remains unclear. The person sits with this unfamiliar weight, unsure whether to name it or let it pass. The silence stretches, patient and observant. It does not accuse, it simply reflects what has been avoided. In this space, the first realization begins to form, not as a thought, but as a feeling. Life is still moving, but something inside has slowed enough to notice. The quiet has changed, and with it the understanding that peace and numbness can sometimes sound very similar, until one day they no longer do. This difference is small, but once felt, it cannot be unheard or gently dismissed again by time. When that unease lingers, another understanding slowly settles in. Youth, it turns out, does not leave the way it is imagined. There is no final day marked on a calendar, no clear moment where someone says goodbye to who they were. It does not announce itself. It simply slips away while attention is elsewhere. Youth leaves during ordinary mornings, during routines done without thought. It leaves while waiting for the right time, while believing there will always be more energy later. It leaves quietly, almost kindly, so gently that it feels rude to call it loss. There was an expectation that youth would end loudly, that it would fade with struggle, or arrive at some dramatic crossroads. Instead, it thins out slowly, like light at the end of a long afternoon. One day the body takes longer to recover. The excitement feels distant. The urgency to begin feels replaced by caution. Nothing feels stolen. Nothing feels unfair. That is what makes it ache. Youth does not take anything by force. It simply steps back when it has been ignored long enough. Looking back, it becomes clear how easily it was missed. Youth was present in the waiting, in the unfinished plans, in the comfort chosen again and again. It was there, patient, believing it would be noticed eventually. Now there is a strange tenderness in realizing it is gone, not completely, but enough to be felt, enough to leave a quiet space behind. There is no anger in this realization, only a soft grief, the kind that comes from understanding too late that something precious does not leave when life becomes difficult, but when life becomes automatic and attention is always somewhere else. It leaves without drama, leaving only this quiet knowing that time was generous once, and that its generosity was mistaken for permanence, until absence finally taught what presence never demanded to be noticed in those years silently. And with that knowing, regret begins to speak, but not loudly. It does not arrive as punishment or shame. It comes softly, almost politely, like a voice lowered out of respect. It appears in small moments, in memories that return without warning, in comparisons made quietly while watching others move forward. Regret does not point or accuse. It asks gentle questions instead. What if that moment had been noticed? What if the waiting had ended sooner? These thoughts do not demand answers. They simply exist, hovering, asking to be felt rather than solved. There is a temptation to turn this voice into blame, to call it failure, to press harder against the past and wish it into something else. But regret resists that harshness. It softens when met with honesty. It lowers its volume when listened to without argument. In this space, memory feels different. The past is no longer a courtroom. It becomes a landscape, uneven and human. Some paths were walked slowly. Some were avoided entirely, not out of weakness, but out of fear, confusion, and the quiet hope that time would understand. Regret, when allowed to speak softly, reveals something else beneath it. Care. It exists only because something mattered, because a life was being lived with expectations, even if they were never spoken out loud. Sitting with this regret does not collapse the present, it steadies it. The weight becomes bearable when it is not fought. Understanding begins where blame loosens its grip, and for the first time, regret is no longer an enemy. It becomes a witness, acknowledging what was lost without demanding punishment, allowing the heart to stay open instead of closing around what can never be changed. In that gentler hearing, regret stops pushing backward and simply sits beside the present, reminding the person that feeling pain does not mean they failed, only that they were alive and caring inside all along. Looking back now, the past begins to look different. The same memories are there, but they no longer carry the same sharp edges. What once appeared as failure starts to reveal something else beneath it,
something quieter and more human. There were reasons things moved slowly. There was tiredness that never announced itself, fear that stayed hidden behind routine, survival that disguised itself as comfort. In those moments, the mind was not careless. It was protecting itself in the only ways it knew.
Judgment used to arrive quickly when these memories surfaced, a harsh voice labeling moments as wasted, choices as wrong. But that voice grows softer when seen clearly. It loses its authority when the full weight of those years is finally understood. The person back then was not standing still out of indifference. They were carrying uncertainty, pressure, expectations that felt too heavy to explain. Rest was mistaken for avoidance. Waiting was mistaken for weakness. But waiting, sometimes, was all that felt possible. Compassion begins quietly, not as forgiveness spoken aloud, but as a pause before criticism, a moment where understanding interrupts blame. The past is no longer an enemy to defeat. It becomes a story of endurance rather than collapse. This way of looking back does not erase regret. It changes how it sits in the body. The weight remains, but it no longer presses down. It rests, and in that resting, something softens. The need to punish fades, replaced by a gentler recognition that surviving those years required more strength than was ever acknowledged at the time. Nothing is excused, yet nothing is condemned. And in that balance, the heart finally sees that being human was never the crime it once believed it had committed during those long, confusing years of becoming someone without guidance. What slowly comes into view is a kind of growth that never asked to be celebrated. It did not show itself through achievements or milestones. It stayed hidden, forming quietly in the background of ordinary days that once felt empty. Those years carried endurance, waking up again after disappointment, continuing routines when motivation was thin, learning how to sit with discomfort without falling apart. None of this looked impressive from the outside, yet it shaped something steady within. Awareness also grew there, sensitivity to silence, the ability to notice emotional shifts, to feel deeply even when nothing seemed to be happening. While life looked still, an inner world was learning its own language. This growth was invisible, and that is why it was overlooked. The world measures progress through movement, through proof that can be shown. Becoming someone quieter, more reflective, does not translate easily to success stories. Yet something important was forming: emotional depth, patience, the capacity to understand others without words. These qualities were not chosen deliberately. They emerged as a response to waiting, to uncertainty, to time that felt unproductive. When viewed this way, the years lose some of their emptiness. They were not lost, they were simply spent becoming rather than achieving. The contrast becomes clear now. While visible progress seemed absent, invisible growth was happening steadily. This realization does not turn the past into a triumph, it turns it into something meaningful. The ache softens when it becomes clear that even in stillness, life was shaping a person capable of understanding, feeling, and carrying complexity with quiet strength, even if no one noticed it happening then at all. Those unnoticed changes mattered later, preparing the heart to hold regret gently, to recognize humanity in others, and to remain open instead of becoming bitter over time. Living with what cannot be rewritten begins quietly. There is no announcement, no final agreement made with the past. It simply becomes clear that time does not move backward, and that effort spent fighting it only deepens the ache. The urge to edit old moments still appears.
The mind returns to familiar scenes, imagining different words, different timing, different courage. But these revisions grow tired. They offer no relief, only repetition. Slowly, resistance loosens its grip. Acceptance does not arrive as relief, it arrives as neutrality. The past is no longer something to conquer or escape, it becomes something to walk beside. Its presence is felt, but it no longer blocks the path forward. Living this way means allowing memory to exist without interrogation. Some days it feels heavier, some days distant. Both are allowed. There is no rule about how much space it deserves. Time continues, indifferent and steady. Instead of pushing against it, there is a subtle shift toward moving with it, not because everything feels resolved, but because the fight has become exhausting. This coexistence changes the emotional landscape. The body softens when it stops bracing. The heart finds a quieter rhythm. Nothing is repaired, yet nothing is being torn open either. In this place, calm replaces urgency. The past remains unchanged, but the relationship with it does not, and that is enough for now. Not peace, not closure, but a gentler way of carrying what cannot longer be rewritten, allowing the present to breathe without constantly being pulled backward into moments that have already completed their time. This calm does not demand understanding, it only asks for permission to exist. With each step, life feels less like a battle and more like a quiet continuation, unfinished, imperfect, but no longer at war with itself today. What remains now is not an empty space, but a quieter presence. The present moment returns, simple and unremarkable. The same room, the same light, the same passing hours, yet something inside feels different, softer, more awake. Youth is no longer here in the way it once was. Its urgency, its endless energy, its careless confidence have faded, but what replaced it is not nothing. Regret still exists, but it speaks more quietly now, like background noise rather than a command. In its place, awareness settles, a gentler attention to time as it moves, to feelings as they rise and fall, to moments that would once have been rushed through without notice. Presence becomes possible in small ways. There is tenderness here, toward the self that waited too long, toward the days that slipped by, toward the person standing here now, still breathing, still capable of noticing life as it happens. Nothing dramatic begins at this ending. There is no sudden resolve, no promise of transformation, just an honest sense of being here, now, with what remains. Loss and presence exist together. Youth is gone, but life has not closed its doors. It has simply changed its pace, its texture, its way of asking to be lived. This awareness does not push forward, it rests. It allows the day to end without pressure to become someone else. The story does not conclude with motivation, only with permission. Permission to live more honestly, to feel without rushing, to exist without apology. In this quiet closing there is peace, not because everything turned out well, but because nothing is being denied anymore. What remains is enough for this moment. And for the first time, that feels true without needing to be proven or explained to anyone else at all. Quietly,
The moment holds no demands, only a calm acknowledgement that being present now is a gentle kind of living for today alone.